Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at kind of a tough question,
Yeah.
um, and that is this idea of why some fathers abandon their children.
Yeah, a really sensitive topic.
Yeah, for sure.
And a lot of emotion in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Mm.
so to jump into this, we've got a Reddit thread, actually, from Rask Reddit,
Okay.
where people are sharing their stories and experiences and perspectives on this question.
And it's it's a very personal thread, a lot of very raw and emotional stories
Yeah.
from adult children who are reflecting on their past, and then also parents and step-parents who are trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah, and it feels like, one of those questions that's been asked for generations,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's really no easy answer.
Yeah, definitely not. And every story is so different.
Right.
And there's so many factors that we're seeing in this thread. But it is fascinating to see how this thread highlights sort of the historical context of this whole issue.
Yeah.
It's not just a modern phenomenon like a lot of commenters point out.
Right.
And societal expectations, gender roles, even from decades ago, really contribute to these situations.
Yeah, there's actually one story here about a commenter's grandmother
Okay.
whose father just up and left the family, leaving her to raise all the kids.
Oh, wow.
And she simply couldn't provide for all of them, so tragically some of the children actually died,
Oh, my gosh.
and others were sent to an orphanage.
That is just heartbreaking.
It is, and it really, I think, underscores the harsh realities for women, especially back then.
Yeah, and societal norms often pushed women into, financial dependence on men, which made it really difficult to leave a marriage,
Right.
even in really bad situations.
Exactly. And it's interesting how that historical context even plays into today.
Yeah.
There's a comment here about a grandfather who actively discouraged his wife from pursuing higher education or a career
Yeah.
because he was afraid that she would leave him if she became independent,
Wow.
you know.
So it's pretty telling.
It is, and it kind of shows you how those power dynamics and relationships
Yeah.
really contribute to these situations.
Yeah. And those patterns, even in a modern context, can repeat themselves.
Absolutely. And
Mm.
even today, right, we see pushback against women working outside the home.
Mm-hmm.
There's some comments in here about, even just stay-at-home moms getting complaints. And a lot of times it's at the insistence of their husbands.
Yeah. It's like a
Right.
double bind for women.
Right.
If they work, they're criticized for not being traditional enough.
Right.
If they stay home, they're seen as dependent.
Yeah.
So you can see how these historical expectations, even when they're not as overt,
Right.
still have an influence on family dynamics and the choices that people are making.
Yeah, it really makes you think about, what choices are available and how much of it is shaped by societal pressures and expectations,
Totally.
economic realities,
Absolutely.
regardless of the era.
Yeah. And this pressure even extends to the children, too.
Oh, interesting.
Several commenters brought up this concept of eldest daughter syndrome.
Okay, I've never heard of that.
So this is where a father who really wanted a son
Okay.
ends up kind of treating his eldest daughter like a surrogate son.
Interesting.
And
So almost like in a tomboyish way.
yeah, exactly. One commenter talked about how her father would always praise her for being a tomboy, which on the surface might seem harmless,
Right.
but she realized looking back that she was suppressing parts of herself to try to win his approval.
Oh, wow.
So it really highlights how, there could be long-term psychological effects
Yeah.
when kids are pressured to fulfill these roles that don't really align with who they are.
And then we also can't ignore the double standard that exists,
Oh,
right?
for sure.
Like women are often criticized for being single mothers, but single fathers aren't viewed nearly as negatively.
Yeah, there's definitely a societal bias that we still haven't fully addressed.
Right.
But moving beyond this historical and societal context, the Reddit thread also reveals some really insightful observations about, the motivations
Okay.
behind a father's absence.
Okay.
One commenter who works with nonprofits pointed out that some fathers are only involved if their children are useful to them.
Oh, wow. So like transactional almost?
Yeah. It's heartbreaking because it suggests that the relationship is transactional,
Yeah.
not built on unconditional love.
Right.
And, some commenters described how their fathers only showed interest when they excelled at sports.
Oh, so like giving them social validation.
Exactly.
Okay.
But when those children didn't meet those expectations, maybe they weren't athletic or maybe they had special needs,
Yeah.
then the fathers became distant,
Wow.
which is so far from, the ideal of a parent who loves and supports their child no matter what.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it emphasizes that, children are individuals deserving of love and respect,
Yes.
regardless of their achievements or challenges.
100%.
And it makes you wonder if a child isn't fulfilling that usefulness factor. What else might be going on with the father?
That is a great question, and that's something that we're going to dig into
Okay,
next.
I'm really interested to hear this.
Yeah.
So stay with us.
So, going back to that question of what else might be going on with the father,
Yeah.
a recurring theme that we see in the thread is just straight up selfishness.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A lot of commenters pointed to that as kind of the primary reason for their dad's leaving.
Yeah, there's this one comment from this woman, and she, straight up asked her dad why he left.
Uh-huh.
And his response was, it was just easier.
Wow.
That was it.
It really speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It does. It reveals a lack of responsibility
Yeah.
and empathy that's just hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, and the daughter went on to say that she, as an adult, she doesn't even know how to have a relationship with her father.
Oh, wow.
She doesn't know where to begin.
Oh, that's got to be so hard.
Yeah, and it really highlights, how a father's absence can impact a child's emotional development and their ability to form healthy relationships later on.
Yeah.
These early experiences can be really formative.
They can leave lasting scars for sure.
Absolutely. Another theme that came up a lot was this idea of the new family phenomenon.
Okay.
So, fathers would start new families and seemingly forget about their previous children.
Yeah, almost like they were replaced.
Exactly. And it leaves the kids feeling abandoned.
Yeah.
Like they weren't valued enough to stay for.
Oh, that's awful.
There's actually a story here about a man who repeatedly started new families with his secretaries.
Oh, my God.
He had all these broken homes and struggling mothers.
Oh, my goodness.
It's just a really callous example of how some fathers prioritize their own desires
Yeah.
above the well-being of their kids and former partners.
But there's a silver lining to that story, though, right?
Yeah.
Because his first wife ended up building a successful life for herself and her children.
That's awesome.
And she chose not to be consumed by bitterness,
Good for her.
which is amazing.
Yeah, it's really a testament to the strength and resilience of so many single mothers
Yeah.
who are facing these challenges and, creating a loving and supportive environment for their kids against all odds.
Yeah, it really goes to show you that even in the face of adversity, there's always potential for healing and growth.
Absolutely.
And it highlights the role models and the positive influences that can step in even when a biological parent is absent.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So it wasn't all about selfishness and new families, though.
Right.
A lot of commenters also pointed to addiction as a contributing factor.
Yeah, substance abuse can definitely play a role.
One commenter said that his father, who struggled with alcoholism, actually moved across the country to avoid seeking help.
Wow.
So it was his way of running from the problem,
Yeah.
but it meant cutting himself off from his family.
It's a really tragic example of how addiction can not only destroy a person's life,
Right.
but it also impacts everyone around them.
Yeah, especially their children.
Yeah. And, it adds another layer of complexity to this whole issue.
For sure.
So we've been focusing a lot on, the experiences of those who are left behind.
Yeah.
But it's important to acknowledge that not every story is one-sided.
Okay.
We saw some comments from fathers who felt alienated from their children.
Interesting.
And they claim that their mothers were preventing them from being involved.
Okay, so this idea of parental alienation
Right.
is not as common in the thread, but it's definitely something we should consider.
Yeah, and one father talked about how he felt helpless because his ex-wife was actively turning his children against him,
Wow.
and it made it really hard for him to have a relationship with them.
That's so sad.
It is, and it reminds us that family dynamics can be really complex. And that there are situations where a father's absence might not be entirely by choice.
Yeah, it's not always black and white.
Exactly. And it's important to approach these claims with sensitivity and recognize that, it doesn't negate the very real experiences of children who have been abandoned.
It's about understanding the nuances of the situation without dismissing the pain and trauma that others have experienced.
Absolutely.
So, we've talked about societal pressures on women, but men face their own set of pressures too.
Yeah, definitely.
And sometimes, even when a father wants to be involved, there might be legal or financial barriers.
Right.
There's a comment here about a father who lost custody of his daughter, even though the mother was struggling with drug abuse and neglect.
Wow.
And he described it as an uphill battle in the legal system.
Oh my gosh.
And the financial burden of the whole thing was just overwhelming.
Yeah, and it sheds light on a very frustrating reality for some fathers who genuinely want to be there, but these systemic obstacles can make it almost impossible.
It raises questions about fairness and equity within the family court system
For sure.
and how those systems can sometimes hinder a father's involvement even when they're trying to do the right thing.
Right. It's definitely something to think about, but even with all these challenges, it's important to remember that there's still room for hope and understanding, even with all these heartbreaking stories and systemic issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really been like an emotional roller coaster.
It has.
We've explored societal pressures, personal choices, the impact of addiction, the complexities of the legal system. And I think it's safe to say that, there's no simple answer to the question of, why some fathers abandon their children.
Right.
But I do think by exploring all these different perspectives,
Yeah.
it helps us start to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, and that's the key takeaway here, right? It's
Yeah.
not about, pointing fingers or placing blame.
Right.
It's about fostering empathy and understanding for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And we've talked about, the need for more open and honest conversations about the challenges of parenthood
Yeah.
for mothers and fathers. And, maybe that's a good starting point.
It is, creating a culture where it's okay to ask for help and where resources are readily available to support parents.
Yeah, and challenging those societal norms that make it harder for fathers to be actively involved in their children's lives.
Totally.
It's about creating a more supportive and equitable environment for all parents,
Exactly.
regardless of gender or circumstance.
Yeah, this Reddit thread, it's definitely difficult to read at times,
Yeah.
but it gives us this really valuable glimpse into the struggles that families face
Yeah.
and reminds us that there's always more to the story.
It's definitely been eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
It's left me with a lot to think about. What about you? What stood out to you from all these different perspectives?
What really struck me was the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
Even in the face of abandonment and heartbreak, there are still these stories of healing,
Right.
forgiveness, and second chances.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to remember those stories
Mm.
because it offers hope amidst, all the difficult stuff.
Yeah,
And I think that's a really powerful message to leave our listeners with.
absolutely. Even amidst these difficult stories, there is potential for growth and healing for individuals and for families.
Beautifully said.
Well,
And as you reflect on all these different perspectives,
yeah.
I'd like to ask you to consider, your own experiences and observations in light of what we discussed today.
Yeah.
And how do these stories resonate with your understanding of fatherhood and family dynamics?
It's a really great question to consider, and maybe an even bigger question is,
Yeah.
what steps can we take as individuals and as a society to better support both mothers and fathers in fulfilling those parental responsibilities
Yeah.
and fostering healthy family relationships?
Yeah, it's a question that definitely deserves our attention and our action
For sure.
because ultimately every child deserves the love and support of both parents whenever possible.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into this really complex and emotional topic.
It's been quite a journey, and we really appreciate you being here with us.
Yeah.